G'day everyone, Greg Canavan here with you from Port Phillip Publishing. Once again, I'm joined by Jim Rickards from Strategic Intelligence. G'day Jim, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine, Greg. How are you?
Very well, thanks. And also I'm joined by your co-editor from Strategic Intelligence, Nick Hubble, joining us from Tokyo today. How you going, Nick?
Yeah, good. Thanks. I'm right next to Mount Fuji.
Very nice.
Can you see it?
I can if the sun wasn't shining in my eyes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we had a chat 2 weeks ago today. We're recording this on Tuesday, the Tuesday after the week after the election. We had a good chat 2 weeks ago. Jim, I think you were closer than just about any other pollster out there in calling how close this election would be. When pressed, you did say that Trump would win the election. At the moment, the media has called it for Biden, which I guess is hardly surprising, but Trump hasn't conceded. Where are we now on Tuesday? And how do you see Trump's chances of victory, or is it very slim as the markets are predicting?
Yeah, great question, Greg. I wouldn't put too much weight on the market predictions. Markets do a terrible job at stuff like this. People say the market's always right. I don't think the market's right or wrong. It just does what it does. You have to be attentive to it. The market thinks of itself as a mechanism for looking into the future, getting the forecast right, and then discounting it back to today's value. The market tries to do that, but they always get the forecast wrong. It's amazing how bad the market's track record is. The market did not see the 2008 crash coming. It did not see the 2020 crash coming. I could go down a long list. So if you say, is the market expecting Biden to prevail, and are they discounting for that? Yes, that is going on. That carries no weight in my mind about whether Biden actually will prevail. There are a lot of other factors, and we can talk about them right now. But markets just have a long history of getting things wrong. So I think we need to kind of start there. As far as Trump's chance, well, a couple of things. You said that the election has been called for Biden. Well, called by whom? It's been called by the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox for that matter, Wall Street Journal. They've all called it. None of them have any authority to call anything whatsoever. They're media, they're publications. They can say what they want. We have freedom of speech, at least for the time being, but they are not determinative at all. In fact, the election for president has not even taken place, and that may come as a surprise to listeners. But let me spend a minute on that because it plays into how we should think about what the final outcome is going to be. So, first of all, in the United States, we do not have national elections. We have 50 separate state elections. The voters in each state get to vote for president in those states, and then it goes from there. But there is no national election. There's an election day, but it's 50 separate state elections, number one. Number two, when Americans go to the polls, and I went out last Tuesday and I voted, you get a ballot of some sort, and it says Biden or Trump and other offices, and you fill in the little circle and you put it in the reader, and that's that. But you're not actually voting for president. You think you are, and it looks that way, but you're actually voting to elect what we call electors. And I'm sorry to turn this into a civics class, but it is important to grasp some of this to understand where we are. You're voting for electors. Electors are slates of individual people. You can look up their names per state who promise to vote for the candidate you choose. So if I vote for Trump or if I vote for Biden, what I'm really doing is voting for a group of electors who then promise, they've been handpicked to go to Washington and vote for that candidate. So we haven't voted for president, we voted for electors. And then the electors vote for president. That vote takes place on December 15th. December 14th. So it hasn't happened yet. They'll elect a president on December 14th. December 8th is a critical day. That's when the electors present their credentials. They say, hey, here we are, the 29 electors from Florida, or the 20 electors from Pennsylvania, as the case may be. So you present your credentials on December 8th, and you vote for president on December 14th. All that's happened so far is that individual Americans have voted state by state for these electors. Now, why is any of this important? It's important because first of all, again, newspapers declaring a winner, that's fine. That's their prerogative, but legally it means nothing. Normally, the things I mentioned, the credentials and the electors voting for president on December 14th, normally these are mere formalities. A clear winner has been determined. Even in a close race, everyone agrees on which states go to which candidate, and everything else is kind of just going through the motions. That is not the case this time. Now, there are 3 states, at least 3, maybe as many as 5, that are very, very hotly contested right now. First of all is Arizona, where they're not done counting the votes. It's very close between Trump and Biden. There are a significant number of votes that have not yet been counted. I'll spare our listeners the details of why that's the case, but it is true. Very hard to know how those votes are going to break, but some reason to think that they could be favorable to Trump, some reason to think that Trump may yet carry the state of Arizona. And even if he does, or if he doesn't, for that matter, it's already so closely contested, meaning well less than 1% difference, that there will be a mandatory recount. Arizona law requires a recount. So A, we're not done counting the votes in Arizona. Trump could yet win, even though media have declared Arizona for Biden. And B, there'll be a recount. So treat that as an open race. Very much the same situation in Georgia. Georgia, I think, is pretty much finished counting its votes, and they might have some absentee ballots and some military votes that come in from overseas. But on its face, it looks like Biden has eked out a very small win, but it, again, so narrow that's within the allowance for a recount. So Trump is demanding a recount, and there's some allegations of voting fraud in Georgia. So let's see how those play out. So Georgia and Arizona are not done. They may go to Biden in the end, but they could go to Trump. Some reason to think, in particular, Arizona may well go to Trump, and actually maybe Georgia as well. That brings us to the big question mark, which is the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes. If Trump could win Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, that's a narrow path, let's say, but if he could win all 3, he would be the next president of the United States. So what's going on in Pennsylvania? Well, here we have to, kind of get out of voting irregularities, or maybe not, and talk about the law a little bit. The United States Constitution says that the electors from each state, and that's how we determine the president, shall be chosen in accordance with a process determined by the legislature of the state. And it actually uses the word legislature in the Constitution. This is not a stretch or an inference or reading something into a statute. It says legislature. And we know that our founding fathers in 1787 knew the difference between a legislature and a court because they were separate articles of the Constitution on that. So the Pennsylvania state legislature has a law, they passed it some time ago, and it says that mail-in ballots are fine, but only if they are received by 8 p.m. on election day. They must be received by 8 p.m. on election day. Because of COVID and for other reasons, and perhaps to support a fraud, the Democratic Party sued in Pennsylvania state courts to extend that deadline for 3 days. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, not the United States Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed and extended the deadline from 8 p.m. Tuesday until Friday. So they gave them 3 extra days. Well, the Republicans appealed that case to the United States Supreme Court. The problem was when the appeal got to the Supreme Court, there was a vacancy. Amy Coney Barrett had not yet been confirmed as the 9th justice. There were only 8 justices, and the court split 4-4. 3 liberals, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Breyer, said Pennsylvania Supreme Court was okay. The 4 conservatives, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Clarence Thomas, said no, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court acted unconstitutionally. The 8th vote was Justice Roberts, and he sort of blows whichever way the wind's going. He sided with the liberals, so you had a 4-4 decision. When you get a 4-4 decision, the lower court ruling stands. You haven't affirmed it. You haven't overturned it. You've just said, we punt. There's no decision in effect. And when you have a tie. And so the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruling stood, except Justice Alito filed a concurring opinion, and he said, okay, but the case is still open. What the Supreme Court was hoping is that it wouldn't matter, that perhaps Biden or Trump would roll up such a landslide that Pennsylvania just wouldn't matter and the whole thing would go away. Kicking the can down the road. The problem is the can is now rolled back and landed at Justice Roberts' feet. So now it's a live case, and But Alito did one more thing. He told the state of Pennsylvania to segregate the late arriving ballots. So all the ballots that arrived on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of last week needed to be segregated and counted. You can say you can count them, but count them separately and segregate them. And if on a second hearing we get a different result, we'll know if we want to disqualify those votes, we can. Well, now along comes Amy Coney Barrett. She has now been confirmed to the Supreme Court. We now have 9 justices. I won't pretend to know what she'll say. I'm not a mind reader, but given her conservative credentials, her training, if mentoring, if you will, by Justice Scalia, and I think I have a pretty good idea what Scalia would do, there's every possibility that she will side with the 4 conservatives. And for that matter, if you get into a 5-4 situation, Roberts may even switch sides to make it 6-3. Now, we don't bet the ranch on this. I'm not saying this will happen. I'm saying this could happen. And it's not a stretch. This is not some, asteroid strikes the earth type of scenario. It's a very live scenario. And you say, well, why would the Supreme Court do that? They could change the outcome of the election. Well, you would say, well, they're not really changing the outcome of the election. They're just getting us to the right outcome. Too bad about the Washington Post and the New York Times. But what they're really doing, this issue is much, much bigger than Trump versus Biden. In the moment, you've got your Trump partisans and your Biden partisans, and everyone's stirred up and America's divided and polarized. That's all true. And I think people abroad, people in Australia might even have a difficult time understanding how much kind of bitterness there is, candidly, and how much polarization there is. But the Supreme Court would take the view, well, we're not really doing this to decide Trump versus Biden. What we're doing is making sure that state courts cannot act unconstitutionally, cannot go rogue and override state legislatures when the U.S. Constitution uses the word legislature. It just does. I mean, what limit would there be on any state Supreme Court amending any state statute involving elections from here on out and to get a desired result if you don't slap down the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania? So the case is coming back with Amy Coney Barrett now in her seat. I could see this being 5-4 or even 6-3. I could see them deciding that the state of Pennsylvania acted unconstitutionally. That's my view as a lawyer, but we'll see what the great lights think. And in which case, then you get into the question of the remedy. What's the remedy? Well, one remedy would be to throw out those 400,000 ballots because that's how many there are. If you do that, Trump wins Pennsylvania because he was winning as of election night. It was only with the late ballots that Biden was able to pull ahead. And if you throw out those late ballots, then Trump wins Pennsylvania. We'll now go back to what I said earlier. If Trump ekes out a win in Arizona, and that's not done yet, and ekes out a win in Georgia because they're going to do a recount, and wins Pennsylvania because its state Supreme Court acted unconstitutionally, then Trump wins. And there are also cases in Michigan and Wisconsin. We'll see where
I was going to ask about that, Jim. I mean, you spoke about these late ballots. What's the state rules in Michigan and Wisconsin? I think it was Michigan where there was news of the 3 a.m. dump of 138,000 ballots that,
right.
All of a sudden went to Biden. What's the situation there?
Correct. Well, that's an issue. There was some defense that, well, we separated the ballots between Trump and Biden, and they were dumped in separately. So if you isolate the one dump, it looks like a Biden dump. Who knows? I don't know all the facts there, and I won't pretend to. But there are different irregularities in Michigan. Now, the issue in Michigan, apparently there's some software glitch, and I put the word glitch in quotation marks because if you write the code that says, hey, push the green button and it's a vote for Biden. And that's what happened. The poll workers, when certain ballots were like, hey, I can't quite read this, the poll workers said, well, push the green button, it'll fix it. And the voters pushed the green button. But the code said, push the green button, it's a vote for Biden. So they didn't know that. And apparently 31 states or so have got similar software. I don't know if they all push these green buttons. And by the way, there are lots of rumors floating around and lots of allegations floating around. I think it's important for listeners to sort them out. There was one I saw that in one polling place, they were handing out Sharpies instead of ballpoint pens. And if you use a Sharpie, the machine can't read it. They were giving out Sharpies, but that's not true. In other words, the machine can read a Sharpie just fine. I did it with a ballpoint pen. I was wishing I had a Sharpie because it would have been easier to fill in the little circle. So there's a lot of stuff like that. You can just discard it. Readers should not be distracted by it, should not spend time with it. But the big things, the ones I'm talking about, which are computer, I won't even call them errors, where they fix this, who knows? But if you can identify that and prove it, then you have another court case, and there are court cases pending where large numbers of ballots could either be thrown out, or those voters might be invited back to vote again, or extreme remedy would be, hey, let's just have another election in the state. Sorry, you messed it up. So I don't know how the courts will rule. As a lawyer, you're trained to argue everything both ways, and I can't argue it both ways. But I was arguing it one way just to make a point, which is that there is a plausible case for Trump. I could argue Biden's case as well, but Biden is the putative winner. There is a plausible case for Trump. This is being litigated in all 5 states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. Arizona and Georgia are 2 states that could very well go for Trump. Pennsylvania could go for Trump for different reasons, not because of the recount, but because of the constitutionality of the late ballots. I think the bad news is we have more uncertainty, even though you wouldn't know that reading the newspapers. The good news is that this will be over before December 8th. It has to be. And the reason I say that is, the reason I say December 8th, that's when the electors present their credentials. Now, what could happen if, for example, in Pennsylvania, let's say that the Supreme Court is still hearing this case, okay? You could have a situation, and this did happen in 1876. Every kind of crazy scenario I'm talking about has happened before, at least once in U.S. history. In 1876, there was such confusion that states certified 2 slates of electors. The legislature said these are the right people, and the governor said these are the right people. You could have a situation in Pennsylvania where the governor, who's a Democrat, certifies 20 electors for Biden, and the legislature, which is controlled by Republicans, certifies 20 electors for Trump, and 40 people show up, each claiming to represent 20 electoral votes. It sounds crazy. It happened in 1876. The Supreme Court knows that, of course, so it's incumbent on them, having kicked the can down the road already, it's incumbent on them to resolve this Pennsylvania case before December 8th, so you don't have exactly the scenario I just described. And I expect they will. So here we are. It's November 10th or so, mid-November, and December 8th is an outside date. So sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to get some clarity. But my only caution and advice for our listeners is we don't have the clarity now. You may draw that conclusion reading the newspapers and saying the self-congratulation, but they're big issues. They're serious ones. I've discarded all the trivial stuff. I'm only talking about big things that could make a difference. They are pending either in courts or recounts, and they will be decided before December 8th, and we'll know more a few weeks from now. But it's sad to say, too soon to settle on a winner.
What would you put the probability on for a Trump victory at this point? Clearly, there's a lot of uncertainty. So let's try and break it down to bring it down to a probability. What's
this is going to sound really lame, but I'm a good statistician, so I'm going to stick to good statistical science. I have to call it 50-50. And the reason is, and this is Bayes' theorem, so it's good applied mathematics. If you don't have enough facts to lean one way or the other, if I thought, boy, this case is such a long shot, Trump's got no chance, I'd give Trump a 10, 20% chance, or vice versa. If I said, this is an open and shut case, Biden will definitely lose, I would say so. But as a lawyer and as a statistician and applied mathematician, I can describe the case. I could go stand in front of the Supreme Court and make the argument, but the best I can tell you is that the uncertainty level is such, or the absence of conclusive facts is such, that you just have to say 50-50. But 50-50 is a lot higher than I think a lot of observers might suppose. They might say, well, Trump's got a 1% chance. Why is he wasting our time? Why doesn't he bow out gracefully? By the way, when you do the analysis I'm doing right now, you run the risk, and for me, this is just an occupational hazard. But you run the risk. People say, oh, you're a partisan. This is just sour grapes. Why can't you accept the result gracefully and move on? Why are you making a show about it? The answer is, I'm not making a show. I'm just an analyst. I'm not working for any campaigns. But I am a lawyer and an analyst, and I can appraise these situations. It's not sour grapes. If I thought Biden won, I would just say so, and that would be that. But I don't think that. And as I say, we have these open issues, and I think rather than be cowed by criticism or intimidated by name calling, I think it's our duty to our readers and our listeners just to step up and say, this is our best analysis. And I think that's the way to think about it.
Well, it's a great point because certainly the media narrative is that Trump has lost and he doesn't have any chance. Nick, I'll bring you in at this point because you're, as we said at the start, you're residing in Japan at the moment, in Tokyo. In Australia, at least, we just take on the media narrative that comes out of the US. What's it like over there in terms of public interest, and secondly the narrative around the election and Trump's chances? What's the view there?
Yeah, so I follow the media in a lot of different places because I've lived there, or because I have connections to those places, or family, or whatever it is. And I think the biggest message that I'd give to people at home, especially investors, is that the media portrayal of what's currently happened and what's going to happen next is just as wrong as it was 6 months ago about what's just happened. And the margin of error and the way things are portrayed are so incorrect and so off the mark so consistently that at some point you've got to realize that you just can't put any trust or faith in what you're being told and the way it's being portrayed to you. So you do have to look for the alternative narratives and the alternative explanations, and you can't go with what the media is presenting to you. The question is then, well, what is going on now? What does it mean for investors? And I think that's especially difficult right now because the media is portraying something that is very certain, the election's over and here's what it means. But neither of those two things are accurate, in my view. First of all, the election's not over, as Jim's just done a good job of explaining. But secondly, what it means thereafter is completely unclear as well. We've got the Senate and the House of Representatives. That's going to be a continuing battle. I think the Republicans actually gained seats in the House of Representatives. So what this means for the next few years, even if it was certain, even if the election was certain, is still uncertain. So especially for Australians, the issue of foreign policy is the key, and the difference between Trump and Biden on that is massive regarding China. So that's the key issue for Australians to focus on. And that key issue is, as Jim has explained, still a 50-50 bet. So we're not going anywhere fast with this. We haven't figured it out yet. And even if it was decided, we wouldn't really know what it means.
Yeah. But by the way, Greg, I agree completely with what Nick said. I could actually put the media analysis in more succinct terms. They've been lying for 4 years. Why should I believe them now? That's how I would put it. But Nick made a point that I'd like to turn to if we can. There's something going on. There's some political uncertainty that is of even greater significance than the presidential race, believe it or not. And Nick said it's the control of the United States Senate. And if I could just spend a minute on that, let's assume Biden wins. We've said 50-50, we'll know in a few weeks, but let's just assume Biden wins. Well, does that mean we get the Green New Deal, return to Iran, return to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, return to the Paris Climate Accord, touchy-feely with China, and leave aside the fact that Biden may be fatally compromised by Chinese intelligence because of the actions of his son. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but that's a big issue that's kind of out there. So all those things, so are we going to get all those things? Are we going to get a $20 trillion Green New Deal, 20 trillion over 10 years, if not more? High double capital gains taxes, getting rid of the filibuster, packing the Supreme Court with 15 justices so they could pick 5 liberals, granting statehood to Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., so you can get 4 more Democratic senators. These are things that will irrevocably, and in my view, severely damage U.S. democracy and the two-party system, perhaps forever. So it's a big deal. Now, do you have that or not? And the answer is, who controls the Senate? Because if even if Biden's president, if Republicans control the Senate, none of that will happen. A bare majority in the Senate without the House and without the White House, you can't make things happen, but you certainly can stop things from happening. And this is one of the reasons the stock market is happy. They see stalemate, and the stock market likes stalemate. Well, let's hope it is. If you're concerned about all those issues I mentioned. So, what's the state of play in the Senate? Well, right now, today, the Republicans have 49 seats. The Democrats have 48 seats. There are 100 members of the Senate. So is 51 control? Well, if Biden's in the White House, the Democrats only need 50 because the vice president can break a tie. So if you get a 50-50 vote, Kamala Harris will issue a tie-breaking vote. So effectively, the Democrats would control the Senate in that scenario. Now, 49-50, that's 3 seats outstanding. One of those seats is in Alaska. It has not been officially called, but it will certainly go Republican. No one doubts that. The Republican, about 60 more plus percent of the votes are in. The Republican has a 2-to-1 advantage. So the Republicans are going to get that seat. So let's make it 50-48. That's the right way to think about it. 50-48. There are 2 open seats. Why are those seats not decided? Well, they're both in Georgia. And Georgia has some funny laws. And one of them is, if you're in a race and you get more than your opponent, you don't win unless you're over 50%. In other words, it's a double hurdle. You have to get the most votes, of course, but you have to get more than 50%. Well, some of these ballots, one of them had, I believe, 10 or 11 candidates. Another one had 4 or 5. The Republican won one of them. David Perdue beat his opponent, Jon Ossoff, but got, I think, like 49.8%, came just short of 50, believe it or not. Leave aside whether that vote was rigged, but let's just call it, let's just say, hey, you're less than 50%. So now Perdue and Ossoff, Jon Ossoff, have to go into a runoff. And on the runoff, there are only 2 candidates. So by definition, somebody will get more than 50%. That runoff is scheduled for January 5th. In the other race, this was Kelly Loeffler. This was the one they call the jungle race. It was like 13 candidates, but one of the other candidates was another Republican. You can have 2 or 3 Republicans, 2 or 3 Democrats, all running for one seat in one state. So the Democratic candidate, Raphael Warnock, got the most votes, but that's because Loeffler got 28%, and Doug Collins, the other Republican, got 23%, and Warner got about 30%. So, sorry, Warnock rather. So Warnock got the most votes. Nobody got anywhere close to 50. Kelly Loeffler, the Republican, finished second. But if you take her and Doug Collins and combine 28 and 23, you get to 51. And Doug Collins has already conceded and thrown his support behind Kelly Loeffler. So you have one race where the Republican was ahead but fell short of 50. You have another race where 2 Republicans combined were over 50, but they split the vote. And that runoff is also scheduled for January 5th. So you've got 3 possible outcomes. One is the Democrats could win both seats. And if they do, they've got 50, and Kamala Harris gives them the tiebreaker, and they control the Senate. And then watch the market drop like a stone, because you're going to get all those things I described. If the Republicans win one or both, they will control the Senate, either with 51 votes or 52. It's a narrow margin, but it's enough to give them control. Makes Mitch McConnell the majority leader, means they have all the committee chairs, they get majority votes on the committees. It's huge ramifications. Now, with hypothetically, if the House is Democrat, House of Representatives is Democrat, and the White House is Democrat, and you have a bare majority in the Senate for the Republicans, which you would, best case, can you get much done? No. But can you stop things? Yes. And what you can stop is the progressive agenda. And the stock market actually likes that. They're like, hey, this is perfect. Stalemate, gridlock, we love it. No surprises. But we won't know until January 5th. So we've got this December 14th date, which is critical, which I described, where the credentials should be set by December 8th. So you've got this, call it December 8th, when we'll know what happens in Pennsylvania. We'll know who's going to be president. And then January 5th, a double runoff in Georgia, when we'll know who's going to control the Senate. But right now, we don't know either one.
So we've still got at least a month or 2 of ongoing uncertainty about the total outcome of this. Jim, there's just one question I wanted to ask you based on something that you've written previously. You've called this election a turning point election. The outcome obviously very important in terms of which way society goes, the economy goes, and Biden's obviously in the camp of globalization, Trump in the camp of nationalism. Given that what you've just said about the potential for gridlock, do you still see that as, I guess, an important turning point election. Will Biden go back in terms of the globalization and the rule by the elites versus the rule by the people? How do you see that playing out with this potential gridlock in play?
Right. Great question. It's a mixed bag, and let me explain that. So this is the most messed up election since 1876. I don't have to repeat the history there, but it was a mess. And it's the most consequential election since 1860. In 1860, Americans actually voted on whether they wanted a civil war or not, because the Democrats, the Southerners, had said, if Lincoln wins, we succeed from the Union. And Lincoln said, if you succeed from the Union, I won't let you do it. So you were actually voting on a civil war. But this is not too far removed. And you're exactly right. Trump is the populist, the nationalist, America first. I like the way he says America first, but Australians should say Australia first and Germans should say Germany first. He said, what's wrong with that? So that's just kind of a view of the world. But I think in terms of the domestic policy and the things that will affect the markets, the Senate race is probably as important or more important than the presidential race, because if the Republicans can keep the Senate, you will not see those highly progressive programs. And you'll see something that probably doesn't look too different than what Trump would have done, because Trump already has a lot of his programs in place. Where the difference lies is in foreign policy. And that should be a much greater concern, I would say, to Australia. Trump has done a couple things. Number one, he has forged this, what they call the Quad. And the Quad is Japan, Australia, the United States, and India. It's not a formal treaty. It's not NATO, but it kind of operates like one. And all you have to do is look at a map and you'll see that India, Australia, Japan, and forward projection from the United States, including allies in the Philippines and Taiwan, have China surrounded and cuts off every seaway, potentially chokes off oil to China, keeps their fleets bottled up, et cetera. This is how Biden and our allies conceived of confronting China. Well, okay, that's a very powerful tool, and those are four very important countries, and they're all, no one wants a war, no one wants a fight, but if you said, show me at least three countries that know how to fight, I would say India, Australia, and the United States, and maybe Japan's ready to step up as well. So that's a very powerful alliance. If Biden is in, as I say, he may be fatally compromised vis-a-vis China. And by the way, I give Australia enormous credit for standing up to China on their own. I've been tweeting out, we have a pretty large following on Twitter. I've been encouraging Americans to buy Australian wine. If the Chinese won't buy it, we will. But seriously, Australia's standing up for the right thing. By the way, they're doing the right thing, not just in terms of trade and strategic alliances, but Australia led the way in calling for an honest, open investigation of the origin of the COVID virus at a time when the United States shied away from that. I have a book coming out on the subject. It'll be out in January. And there's very, very good evidence that this came from a laboratory, not from the wet market. Australia, I think very wisely, didn't call it one way or the other, but they said, let's have an investigation. That by itself, which was, I think, good science, good policy with some courage, was enough to provoke China, let alone any trade disputes. So it's given China's willingness to sort of try to bully Australia, although Australia is not one to be bullied. I think the alliance with the United States, which is strong, is more important than ever. And that's one I think that Trump would strengthen and Biden would probably weaken. And so that's a big deal for Australia. Obviously, you'll be very attentive to that. But that plays out in the Middle East as well. I mean, the United States was instrumental in getting the first two Arab-Israeli peace treaties in 25 years. 25 years. And then one more was Sudan. Sudan is not Arab, but they are Muslim. So 3 Muslim countries, 2 Arab countries signing peace deals with Israel. Again, all kind of brokered and facilitated by the United States. Now, what was the big picture there? Well, 2 things. Number one, the Arabs realize that they've got to confront Iran. They need to leave their disputes with Israel behind them in order to focus their attentions on Iran. Number one. Number two, the most insoluble issue in the Middle East, of course, is the Palestinians. But everyone was spent decades saying, give the Palestinians money, give them aid, give them this, give them that. And they never compromised. But the Palestinians relied on the Arabs to bail them out. Suddenly, with wealthy Arab nations signing peace treaties with Israel, the signal to Palestine is you're getting cut off. You're not going to get any more money from us, not from the UAE, not from Bahrain, which was the other country, and perhaps not from Saudi Arabia if they are next in line. That was the momentum. But the idea was, it was actually far from antagonizing the Palestinians. It was a way to get the Palestinians to see reality and strike a deal with Israel on their own, because they're going to get cut off from all this money. Now, does that get blown up? I think it does. I think Kamala Harris has already come out and said, first thing we're going to do when we're sworn in is give aid to the Palestinians. Well, that could undo this very good progress that's been made by the Trump administration. So if you say, well, what's the difference between Trump and Biden? I think on domestic policy, it all hinges on the Senate. If the Republicans hold the Senate, you won't see much change. The U.S. stock market likes that. If the Democrats get the Senate, which they could if they win 2 runoffs in Georgia, you could see the more extreme versions of the progressive program implemented, and that will be, the stock market can't see it, but I can see it, we can see it, and that would be very bad for stocks. In foreign policy, the Senate has less to say, and therefore the president has more degrees of freedom to act unilaterally, and he will. And so it's a much more problematic for Australia to see if we're going to build on Trump's alliances or perhaps blow them up.
Well, it's certainly, I guess, an issue for us, that the China issue. But just on the topic of the Middle East, I note that Iran is already calling for the treaty to be reinstated that was in place under the Obama administration. Right. That's another source of instability in the Middle East. I just want to move on now to just a market question. Overnight, as I said, we're recording this on Tuesday, 10th of November. Overnight, there was news of a vaccine came out. Markets had a very strong run. The S&P 500 and the Dow were both up strongly, although the Nasdaq was actually down. Also, gold fell quite strongly. I just want to get both of your views on the gold price here, whether you think, Nick, I'll ask you first, whether you think this is a short-term issue for gold or something a little bit more concerning, given that sentiment is now back in the very bullish mode and we're going to get back to normal because everyone's going to take this vaccine and life returns to normal. What's your view on that?
I think the most likely explanation for the gold fall is this knee-jerk reaction to everything's saved, everything's wonderful, everything's sorted out, we're not going to have any more money printing. And I don't think we've even seen the first half of the impact of lockdowns and COVID yet. I think all of those mortgage default deferrals, all of the bonds that are going to default, all of these issues are not going to be solved by a vaccine that's going to take months to deliver, let alone whether it actually does work. There's just still a lot of questions out there. So for me, this is just a buying opportunity, and the perfect one, because as the reality strikes and the need for continued QE becomes more obvious, then the gold price really will rally, because then it's indefinite. It's not a temporary measure to fight COVID. The QE that's needed, the bailouts that are needed, are no longer a temporary thing. It's going to be a long-term pressure for the gold price, and that's just ideal for gold buyers. As disappointing as it is, that's just historically what's happened in the gold market. Each time you get this big plunge, it's just a buying opportunity, and that's great for people who are joining it and watching this and haven't got a position in gold yet.
Right.
So, Jim, I'm assuming you've got similar views on the gold price.
I agree completely with Nick. I had a forecast, I still do, that gold will reach $15,000 per ounce by 2026, early 2026. We don't have time on this podcast for the in-depth analysis there, except I would remind the listeners, there is analysis. It's not, I don't pull the number out of the air. I'm not trying to get attention. There's a very good monetary analysis and technical analysis that both come out around the same price, $15,000 now. So just to be clear, I had that forecast before COVID. That's what I would have said to you last January, and I'll say it now. And so the vaccine is good news. No one thinks that's not good news, except for, Governor of New York, but who thinks of it as a Trump vaccine, but he's already killed thousands of people. I guess he's trying to kill more. But the vaccine is good news, but independent of the price of gold, if you had said to me last January, before COVID really sank in, Jim, how's the U.S. economy? I would have said it's weak. not in a technical recession, but probably in something resembling a depression. So my analysis that gold's going much higher and the economy is weak and possibly headed for a recession was true before COVID. And it's equally true now. So we had a severe recession, worse than US history, actually, in the first and second quarters of 2020. We had a nice bounce back in the third quarter. It's not a V-shaped recovery. It went down and it came back, but it didn't come back far enough. And so we're still deep in the hole. And the fourth quarter is looking, estimates are maybe 3%. 3% is not going to, so you fell in a 50-foot hole, you climbed 30 feet out, we're still 20 feet below ground and you're going to get one more foot. Well, good. Guess what? You're still well below where you started. We're not going to get to 2019 levels of output until 2023 at the earliest, with or without a vaccine. As I say, if COVID went away tomorrow, and it won't, by the way, even if the vaccine works, you got to get these doses distributed. You have to get the inoculations. You have to prioritize who gets them. And it works. That's good. How long? Do you need boosters? Et cetera. Does it wear off after 3 months? Will the COVID come back? What if it's for one strand of COVID and technically it's the SARS-CoV-2 virus. COVID's the disease, but the virus mutates and the vaccine doesn't work on the mutation. Let's hope that none of those things happen, but they can, and they have in the past. So it is good news, no doubt about it. But I would have said the economy's weak and gold's going higher before COVID. And I would certainly say that now. And I agree with Nick, this is a buying opportunity. Gold's going a lot higher for reasons that have nothing to do with vaccines, pandemics, or COVID. Those are very, very important things. But the fundamentals of gold are extremely strong.
Well, it brings to mind maybe a final question for this interview. You have a new book coming out, I think, in the new year called The New Depression. This election that we've been talking about today, it really makes no difference to the fundamental structure of the US economy, does it? I mean, your view is that there are massive structural impediments to getting back to any type of strong growth platform in the US. Do you want to just give us a very brief sneak peek at the book and what your sort of thesis is there?
Sure, happy to. The book is called The New Great Depression: Winners and Losers in a Post-Pandemic World. It's got 6 chapters. The first chapter is on COVID, just the medical side of it, and leans to the view that it came from a laboratory, and there's very good evidence for that. Chapter on the lockdown. Lockdowns don't work. I demonstrate that in the book. They can destroy an economy. They're very good at that. They do almost nothing for the disease. You could have got 90% of the benefit at 10% of the cost. But then from there, I pivot into why we're in a new depression, why monetary policy won't work. The answer is velocity. You can print all the money you want, but I tell people $7 trillion times zero is zero, meaning $7 trillion money supply, fine, but if velocity is headed to zero, your economy is headed to zero. Fiscal policy doesn't work because our debt to GDP ratio is too high. The United States is now in the same league as our peer group is Lebanon, Greece, and Italy. So that's the US peer group in terms of debt to GDP ratios. So fiscal policy, you can spend money. You can run deficits and you can print money. I don't question the ability of the Congress to spend money. I don't question the ability of the Fed to print money. I make the point that they won't work, that it is money printing and money spending, but deficit spending, but it is not stimulus. Don't call it stimulus because there is no stimulative effect. And then kind of go on there. I at the end of the book, I describe what does work. And probably won't surprise listeners to understand it has something to do with gold. But we saw 2 presidents, President Roosevelt and President Nixon, both break the back of deflation and cause inflation. In one case for good reasons, another case not so good, but cause inflation by greatly devaluing the dollar against gold, not against other currencies, not against the euro, the yen, the Aussie dollar, yuan, but against gold. Because gold can't fight back. Gold's not, you're not in the currency wars at that point. You're really getting back to something that is much more of a yardstick and a real benchmark for what the dollar is actually worth. So the book is coming out January 12th. It was supposed to come out October 27th. I was disappointed that it got bumped. The reason had nothing to do with me or my publisher, and I have a good relationship there. It had to do with the printers. The printers were jammed because the books are like fashion. You have a spring season and a fall season. The spring season got bumped because nobody was shopping and nothing worked in April and May to the fall. But the fall calendar went ahead as planned, which meant you had twice as many books in the fall, and they literally couldn't print them all. And the publishers had to triage, and they prioritized political books, because who wants a political book after election day? Nobody. So between the spring list and the political books, I got bumped to January. I was a little frustrated, but actually right now I'm not unhappy for two reasons. Number one, my book's not political. I mean, I mentioned Trump because he happened to be the president, but there's nothing in it about the election. And to your point, Greg, and it's a good one, there's nothing about Trump versus Biden that will affect the economy and affect the path of the economy, except for the worst. You can make it worse, but you can't make it better, because the Fed's impotent, deficit spending is impotent, and I don't even talk about the election in the book. So, so the book has a good shelf life in that sense, and I like the fact that it's coming out after the election season when we can consider it on its own. But the other benefit of pushing it back a couple of months was I got to write more. I got to update it. So the book is, it's not the book I wrote in May. A lot of it is, but I was able to update it even as recently as October. So when this comes out in January, it'll be very fresh. But the point is, and it's the one you made, Greg, which is that the economy has serious problems that are bigger than the politicians, bigger than the political parties, and that are not going away. And readers will benefit from, first of all, understanding that. And then secondly, I get into some portfolio and asset allocation solutions that will serve investors extremely well in this environment.
Well, we certainly look forward to seeing that in early January, and it'd be great to have you back on and chat about that. And that would be in the aftermath of the Georgia runoff elections for the Senate as well. So there could be quite a bit to talk about. I think we'll leave it there for today, Jim. Thanks so much for your insights. And Nick, thanks for joining us from Tokyo. And thanks everyone for listening. And we'll be back again to hear more from Jim as the situation develops. Thanks again.